Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer. Today, I want to take you through a deep dive analysis of the Ostagar War Camp and the Korcari Wilds from Dragon Age Origins. These two locations are part of the game's Prologue, but just because what happens in Ostagar acts as an inciting incident for the main quest, and you don't really get to change any serious outcomes based on what you do during the Prologue, it doesn't mean Ostagar is less important than the other main quest areas. Ostagar is likely the first time you get the sense you're part of something truly bigger, and that you're fighting against a foe that can't be underestimated, because if the Darkspawn aren't taken seriously, they will swarm the lands and blight everything and everyone. Initially, I wanted to only talk about the Ostagar camp as part of this video, but I realized that the Korcari Wilds are integral to the experience, so it couldn't be relegated to a different video. Even if, for most of the wilds you fight Darkspawn, you have a few important moments in there that need to be highlighted for story and lore reasons. And of course, the combat itself is also worth looking at, seeing as it may be the first time the player has a full party of 4 characters. So this is going to be a long one again. Hope you got yourself some snacks and something to drink. Get comfortable, and feel free to put this on your second monitor if you already know what Ostagar and the Wilds look like. There probably won't be any new areas you haven't seen before. Before we get into it, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members. You're all amazing, and I couldn't do this without you. If you want to support me, subscribing and joining as a member would help a lot, but only do it if you actually enjoy my content. I'm always grateful, even if you just like the video and maybe leave a comment. Okay, let's explore everything Ostagar has to offer, both during the day, before adventuring into the wilds, and in the evening as you return for the Grey Warden joining ritual. After that, the disastrous Battle of Ostagar begins in earnest, ultimately leading to King Kaelin's death and the decimation of the army and the Ferelden Grey Wardens. But first, a bit of context about Ostagar and the Korcari Wilds. Ostagar is a ruined Tevinter fortress located in southern Ferelden on the edge of the Korcari Wilds. This is the farthest the ancient Tevinter Imperium managed to push into the barbarian lands of the southeast, and it was once one of the most important imperial holdings south of the Waking Sea. From Ostagar, the Tevinter soldiers watched for signs of invasion by the Chastened barbarians. The strategic positioning of the fortress beside a narrow pass in the hills means that the Chastened, or any attacking force, would need to pass by it to access the fertile lowlands in the north, and on top of that, the fortress itself is difficult to siege. Like most imperial holdings, Ostagar was abandoned after Tevinter's collapse during the First Blight, and was then claimed by the Chastened. But over the ages, the Chastened threat dwindled. First, they were defeated by Hafter after the Second Blight, and then their influence further diminished as the tribes united under King Calenhad to form Ferelden. During the events of the game, in the Dragon Age, no soldiers had been stationed in the areas for 4 centuries, although the construction of the fortress is solid enough that it has stood the test of time, and a dwarven-made Tower of Vishal is also in one piece. The Korcari Wilds, on the other hand, are not really that well documented or explored. They are a cold expanse of forest and swamp, and people don't even know how far south they extend. They are home to the Chastened people, and south of the Wilds, there is a mysterious region covered in snow for most of the year called the Sunless Lands. The Sunless Lands are an interesting topic in and of themselves because they are filled with ice and white-capped mountains. It's an extremely hard area to explore and inhabit, although it is known that people live in the far south. Even though some people assume the inhabitants of this cold region must be the Chastened, Brother Genetivi, one of the most prominent Chantry scholars, learns that whoever these people are, they are not considered Chastened by the rest of the tribe. They're called Agadi, meaning exile in their language. So they were probably Chastened who were exiled from the main tribe in the Korcari Wilds long ago, who ended up forming their own culture over the decades or centuries. Anyway, the Sunless Lands are and aren't part of the Korcari Wilds. I don't even know where you draw the line to say one stops and the other begins. Maybe where there's too much ice and snow. But the part of the wilds that we get to see in Dragon Age Origins is just a regular forest swamp kind. What we know about the wilds is that the Chastened who separated from the larger Alamari tribe moved there over 2 millennia ago in minus 1415 Ancient. In minus 410 Ancient, a group of Qunari landed in the southern part of the wilds and established a colony there, but they are believed to have been killed during the First Blight, but it's likely some of their female people were taken by the Darkspawn and turned into broodmothers, giving birth to the first ogres in Thedas. The wilds are also filled by a strange perpetual mist, which is apparently not natural, but magical in nature according to the local legends. Long ago, when the werewolves terrorized the territory of Ferelden, a powerful Alamari Arl, whose territory was near the Korcari Wilds, ventured into the forest, killing every wolf he could find, as well as any Chastened, because he thought they could be werewolves in disguise. A Chastened mother found her sons dead at the soldiers' blades, one of which she stabbed into her own heart in grief. A great mist is said to have seeped from this wound and spread throughout the wilds, and the mist was so thick that the Arl and his soldiers were lost inside it forever. The Korcari Wilds are also a prominent location in the Dragon Age novel The Stolen Throne, written by David Gator. In it, Prince Merrick fled into the wilds together with Loghain to escape the forces of the Orlesian usurper king Megran during the Ferelden Rebellion in 896 Blessed. At the time, there was also a Dalish clan residing in the wilds, which is of course absent during the events of Origins, because even if there had been a Dalish clan that far in the south, they would have quickly moved north to get away from the Darkspawn. One little note about Ostagar and the surrounding area is that if your warden is a Dalish elf, after you've ended the Blight, you can request for the ruler of Ferelden to grant a boon to the Dalish, or a boon is granted to the Dalish if you die. This results in some of the hinterlands, including the ruins of Ostagar and the Korcari Wilds, to be granted to the Dalish. Of course, none of the games after DAO does anything with this particular detail, but hey, it's interesting to imagine the Dalish making a more permanent camp or village in the ancient fortress, which I think is pretty cool. Anyway, back in the prologue, King Kaelin's army already made good use of the fortress before the player character arrived, having defeated the Darkspawn in 2 skirmishes. However, one aspect that perhaps the king, his general, and his soldiers didn't quite consider is that even though Ostagar is a great defensive position against an invading force made out of people who have survival instincts, the Darkspawn have no such qualms or fears of death. They will charge into anything with as much force as necessary to achieve their goal, no matter the loss of life. After all, in the Deep Roads, more Darkspawn are continuously bred through broodmothers, and even when the bulk of the horde is on the surface, the Deep Roads are still teeming with the blighted creatures. Was Ostagar a good choice as the site of the battles against the Darkspawn? We can't really know, because due to Loghain's retreat, the battle was lost, and the ruined fortress was further ruined by the Darkspawn, so I'm unsure whether it would ever get used again as the site of a major battle. During the Return to Ostagar DLC, it still seems to be mostly standing, though in decidedly worse shape, but I'm not an architect or engineer, so I have no idea whether it would still be considered structurally sound enough to be able to protect an army using it defensively. Regardless of whether or not Ostagar is a good fortress against the Darkspawn, no one can deny how majestic it is, and how well built it is to have been able to withstand many battles for hundreds of years. The first time I arrived in Ostagar with my human noble, I was in awe at how tall everything was. All of these grand arches that are quite obviously meant to be imposing, not necessarily having a practical purpose, unless there's something about Tevinter magic that we don't know that is augmented by arches. You and Duncan are greeted by none other than King Kaelin as you arrive at the edge of the fortress near the Tower of Ishal. You have some different dialogue options when you talk to Kaelin, which is a nice touch. As a human noble, you can tell him about Arl How's coup against your family, and he promises to bring How to justice. As a city elf, you can let him know you killed the Arl's son because he assaulted your friends and family, and it's honestly a testament to Kaelin's understanding nature and his respect towards the Grey Wardens that he doesn't try to arrest you then and there. A dwarf noble can say King Endrin of Orzammar is their father. The other origins don't have something nearly as important to say, though Kaelin seems to think mages are very welcome as part of the army because their magic is useful, and he has heard enough of the Dalish elves to be able to say that they are people who possess remarkable skill and honor. The dwarf commoner kind of gets the shaft here, since there's not anything really special either Kaelin or your character can say, but then again, this origin in general feels very neglected. In any case, I won't harp on about the origins themselves. You can watch my in-depth ranking of them if you care about that. But as your introduction to the area is literally the King of Ferelden, I figured I'd take a moment to highlight what can be different about your meeting with him depending on your origin story. Honestly, I love Kaelin, so I might at some point make a deep dive video about him, because there's a lot more in the background and lore and cut content that isn't directly explored in the game, and it's such a shame. He's quite the complex character. After your introduction to the king, Duncan lets him know that the forces of Arl Eamon, Kaelin's uncle, could arrive in less than a week, but Kaelin thinks that the current army's strength will suffice and that they shouldn't delay any longer. He seems incredibly confident in the upcoming battle, though it's uncertain whether he actually believes it's this easy to defeat the Darkspawn, or if he is putting on a brave face to try to inspire everyone so that they have at least some chance of winning. After all, one of the things we know about Kaelin is that he believes a king's true duty is to unite his people against a common enemy, which is why he left the actual administrative and political aspects of ruling to his wife, Anora. After boasting about how easy this is and how he isn't even sure this is a true blight because the archdemon hasn't been sighted yet, Kaelin leaves to talk to Loghain about strategies. Well, to be bored by Loghain's strategies, apparently. Duncan lets the hero know that even though the king and the other people in the army doubt that this is a true blight, he knows that an archdemon is leading the Darkspawn. I never understood why the Grey Wardens didn't just say they saw the archdemon. Even if they don't explain anything about their power of sensing the Darkspawn and getting visions of the Archdemon, they could just lie and say they scouted the Deep Roads and saw it there, but they couldn't reach it because the horde was too large. I just think if the Warden said, yes, there's a huge nasty dragon leading them and we saw it with our own eyes, people would believe them and take this more seriously. But maybe that's just me. Anyway, Duncan lets you know that you will have to go through a secret joining ritual at the end of the day with the other 2 recruits, but that you have a bit of time to explore Ostagar and meet your fellow recruits Davith and Sir Jory, as well as Alistair, the most junior warden who will accompany you as you prepare for the joining. This is the moment you are left alone, free to explore the new area. Near the Tower of Vishal, there's not very much. You can talk to the guard at the gate leading up to the tower, and he'll tell you that the area is off limits because Logain's soldiers are clearing the tower out for it to be used later during the battle. If you ask him why, he'll explain that the soldiers found some tunnels leading underground, and they're currently checking to see how far they go and securing the locations. Some players took this to mean that Logain was actually trying to make the tunnels more easily accessible by the Darkspawn or some such thing. I don't think so. If anything, what is most likely is that he had some of his men stationed at the tower ostensibly to keep it secure so that they could ambush the Warden and Alistair when they would be inevitably sent there to light the signal. He was well aware of Alistair being Marik's bastard son, and likely knew that Duncan or even Kaelin would want to keep him out of the fight. Since Logain didn't trust the Grey Wardens, he most certainly didn't trust a Grey Warden who he probably believed was only recruited due to having Theran blood. So I think Logain might have been planning to retreat from the battle. He'd blame it on the fact that the signal fire from the Tower of Vishal never came because the Grey Wardens totally betrayed the king, not because his own soldiers ambushed and slaughtered them. And his plan would have worked perfectly, with no survivors who would tell any different tales, except for the fact that the underground tunnels his soldiers found weren't just a bit of storage area or a cave. They led to the Deep Roads, and the Darkspawn managed to find the tunnels and overwhelm Logain's soldiers. I think it also makes far more sense if we look at it this way, because there are various traps laid out in the tower. In particular, on the ground floor, there's a grease trap. I don't see the Darkspawn knowing how to set that kind of trap, do you? I absolutely think Logain's men were the ones who put that there. The Darkspawn emissary just takes advantage of seeing something flammable on the floor and seeing your group's load and possibly slipping on the oil to cast that fireball. Anyway, not to get into the Tower of Vishal again, I've already talked about it plenty. Before the Battle of Ostagar itself, you have no way of interacting with it, so the soldier sends you off after answering your questions. He is also one of the people who can tell you that it was used in the past to protect the lands from the Wilders in the south, and that it's of dwarven make. The area on the other side of the tower, overlooking the valley, is beautiful, but empty. There's a few sacks, a locked chest, and a little elf root, but that's about it. The soldiers give you basic greetings if you interact with them, and the only thing you can do here, other than loot the scant few containers placed here, is take in the scenery. And what majestic scenery it is. Too bad we never get to actually fight down there in the valley. It would have been really cool. You cross a huge bridge with statues, another great place to take in the vista, and pass by a soldier who greets you. If you take the time to talk to him, he can give you directions and a bit of information about the camp, where you can find the king, Logain, Duncan, Alistair, where the mage tents are, where you can get supplies from the army's quartermaster, and he also mentions there are kennels where the Mabari war dogs are being kept. There's a bit more to the camp than what he points you towards, but those are the main points of interest. Starting with the king's tent, Kaelin isn't there, likely went off drinking with the wardens or the soldiers, though in his conversation with you and Duncan he said he'd go talk to Logain about strategy. Whatever the case, if you have a rank in the coercion skill, you can persuade the king's guards to tell you a bit about King Kaelin. He'll tell you that Kaelin and Logain have been arguing, both about the battle as well as something related to Queen Anora, Logain's daughter, about something Kaelin did or something Anora did, from what we know in the lore, and from some cut content that unfortunately never got integrated into Denrim and the Landsmeet. Kaelin was planning on marrying Empress Selene to make an alliance between Ferelden and Orlais. It wasn't only a political choice, but it was also due to the fact that Anora was infertile and thus couldn't produce an heir of Theran blood. Obviously, Logain would be furious about this, since he fought off the Orlesian occupation of Ferelden together with Kaelin's father Marik when they were young, and he utterly hates the Orlesians. Plus, Kaelin is planning on replacing Logain's daughter with not just any Orlesian, but the worst of them all, their leader. You have a few more interactions available with the guard in front of Logain's tent. You can similarly ask him to tell you a bit more about Logain, and first of all, he will be offended that you don't know about Teyrn Logain, who helped King Marik fight off the Orlesians and became a hero who was raised to noble status from being a commoner due to his heroic deeds. He can then be persuaded to tell you what Logain has been doing in his tent, which is much the same what the King's Guard told you. They've been arguing for days, feeling comfortable to yell at each other since Logain has known Kaelin since he was born. The guard thinks that the king should listen to Logain because the general strategies are what caused the army to do as well as they have so far. But the most interesting thing you can do here is that you can actually persuade the guard to bring Logain out, saying that you have a message for him. You don't in fact have anything important to discuss with him, but it's pretty cool that you can interact with Logain one-on-one before the big betrayal happens. He recognizes you as a newest warden recruit based on Kaelin's excited description of you, and he also finds you look familiar if you're a human noble. He'll say he heard about Kaelin's promise to deal with How, and says that if Kaelin gets his way, you'll get your justice. He then leaves you with a very interesting comment.
Now I must return to my task. Pray that our king proves amenable to wisdom, if you're the praying sword.
And if you ask, and if he doesn't, Logain's answer is,
Then simply pray.
I find this line fascinating, because it has always left me wondering whether there was any chance for Logain to not abandon the king and the Grey Wardens at Ostagar. If Kaelin agreed to send the Orlesians away and stopped any attempts at a marriage or alliance with Empress Selene, would Logain have actually changed course and disregarded his plan to get Kaelin killed? Or even this, if Kaelin had agreed to join Logain's group instead of charging in with the Grey Wardens, would Logain have kept him safe, maybe just got the Wardens killed because he didn't trust them? I think it would be perhaps even more interesting if there's two different versions of the Battle of Ostagar. One where Logain retreats and everything else is the same, and another where he does actually try to charge in and pincer the Darkspawn, only it goes wrong and he is forced to call a retreat because the Darkspawn forces are simply overwhelming. We could of course see him comment in the cutscene right as our wardens light the signal fire that it seems like it's far too late, but if that's the signal, that's the signal. They have to try. And then he sees Kaelin being crushed by an ogre just a bit farther away from him and realizes he's failed to protect the king. And frankly, I personally think it would make him an even better villain because he could 100% logically believe that the Wardens are the ones who for some reason wanted Kaelin dead and lured him into a sense of security, convinced him to let them be the ones in charge of lighting the signal fire for Logain to charge, only to not do it on time and doom both Kaelin and Logain's forces. After all, it's not unheard of for the Wardens to take up arms against a king. They had done so in the past against the tyrant King Arland, after which they were exiled from Ferelden, and they were only recently allowed back by King Merrick. Also, I believe Logain probably knows some of the things that happened during the events of the novel The Calling, which has Merrick seeing how some Grey Wardens could get corrupted or convinced to work together with Darkspawn, specifically with the Architect, who is one of the original Tevinter Magisters, who got blighted and turned into Darkspawn when traveling physically into the Golden City in the Fade. The Architect has this grand plan of bringing peace between the Darkspawn and the other races at any cost, and its initial plan during the events of The Calling was to spread the blight all over Thedas because the people and creatures that would survive the corruption of the Taint would turn into Darkspawn ghouls, and thus there would be no need for them to fight the Darkspawn anymore. So with Logain likely knowing some of this information from King Merrick, I could see a version of the Battle of Ostagar where he genuinely believes that the Grey Wardens purposefully did all of it to kill and corrupt as many people as possible, to leave Ferelden defenseless against a horde that would try to blight the entire country and then spread to the entire world. Unfortunately, this isn't how Logain ends up abandoning Kaelin, so to me there's far less depth to his character and his actions than could have been. Still, these little bits of conversations that we can have with Logain, as well as see in cutscenes, are certainly compelling and get the mind going with ideas for what could be. And I always think that if it makes sense, having the hero talk to who ends up being the game's villain before any such thing happens is very cool. It can potentially make you a bit more sympathetic towards the villain, or at least you can understand some of their motivation. Plus, you get to see how they are just as a person before they become this big bad who must be defeated for the greater good. Up the ramp from the king and general's tents, there is an army commander showing the corpse of a Darkspawn to a group of soldiers and explaining some details about the Darkspawn to them. That they are monstrous, yes, but can be killed, and that their blood is dangerous. It burns and it can infect you with the taint for which there is no cure. A nice little piece of lore that is delivered in an immersive way, since yes, absolutely it makes sense that the more experienced soldiers would explain to the newer soldiers how to fight Darkspawn and what specifically to try to avoid and such. We also see some soldiers shooting arrows and bolts at target dummies for practice. There are 2 gossip NPC soldiers who have a few conversations about the upcoming battle, and some players headcanon these to be a female version of Hawk, the protagonist of Dragon Age 2, and her brother Carver, due to the fact that the woman's voice actress is the same one who voices Hawk. Otherwise, not much to see other than the cool environment, a couple of containers, and a chantry priest saying some basic lines from the chant. Going back down to the main camp area, we can see Duncan and potentially our dog if the hero's origin is a human noble. The dog just barks happily if you interact with him, and Duncan doesn't really want to talk to you much since you are supposed to find Alistair and the other recruits to prepare for the joining. So if you had any questions about the Grey Wardens or Darkspawn, I hope you talk to Duncan during your origin story, because that's the only real chance you get. Near Duncan is an interesting group of Ash warriors who are getting ready to scout, potentially in the Korcari Wilds, since at least some of them seem to have survived the Battle of Ostagar, due to the fact that later the bandits in Lothering mentioned that some of the Ash warriors had recently passed through just before the Warden. You can interact with the Ash warrior leader, who can tell you about the history and practices of his group. They are inspired by Luthias' dwarf son. I don't actually know whether he was a human or a half-dwarf or something, but he was part of an Alamari tribe and he was described as smaller than his peers, so I think he just had dwarfism but was in fact a human. He fell in love with the Dwarven King's daughter, Skaya. They fled the Dwarven Kingdom together, and Skaya taught Luthias the fighting style of the Berserker warriors. This is, by the way, not at all what the actual Berserker specialization in the game is. What the Ash Warrior leader describes is very much a copy-pasted version of the Rage Beyond Death power of the Zealot Barbarian subclass in D&D. I like Dragon Age far more when it's trying to be original, not copying things from Lord of the Rings or D&D, thanks. Anyway, the rest of the story about Luthias is quite interesting, and as with most stories in Dragon Age that are about men who betrayed one lover for another and then got punished, I wonder if Mythal had anything to do with it. Luthias was said to be seduced by Morriganan, the beautiful chieftain of the Avar, so I just think it's interesting that Flemeth just so happens to name one of her daughters Morrigan later on. Coincidence? Perhaps. In any case, the way the Ash Warrior leader speaks to the hero is actually based on their race, so if you're a dwarf, he will be extra respectful. With a human, he acts a bit standoffish, but fine, and he is pretty rude to elves, which is a bummer. What a jerk. Still, I imagine that maybe the Ash Warriors could have been one of the factions we ended up recruiting if the human barbarian origin had been a thing, and if the Urn of Sacred Ashes part of the quest was more than just a glorified fetch quest with a ton of combat, albeit somewhat challenging, and a dumb puzzle on the way. When you first approach the Ash Warriors, you also see this scrawny little elf messenger who has to run around the camp delivering messages and items to people. If you talk to him, he'll tell you as much and ask if you need anything from him. If you say yes, he'll assume you're the person he needs to give Sir Garland's sword to, and if your hero has the coercion skill, you'll be able to lie and convince him to give you the sword. Even if you don't have persuasion, you can intimidate the poor guy into giving you the sword anyway, without needing any particular skill for it since, well, he is genuinely just a defenseless elf working as a servant in the camp. What do you expect? By the way, fun fact, if you get the sword, you're also awarded 100 XP because this is an unmarked side quest. Not much else down the way towards the gate that leads out into the wilds, just a knight who is scripted to go tell Duncan about you stealing if you fail a stealing attempt on someone in camp. It's particularly funny if you try to steal from Duncan himself, then the knight comes all in a huff to tell Duncan that one of his men noticed you trying to steal. Like, yes buddy, Duncan was right there when it happened because he was the target. Anyway, going back from Duncan's bonfire, we have the kennels, where any non-human noble character will be asked by the kennel master to muzzle a dog that got the Darkspawn taint. He'll also ask you to look for a flower in the Korcari Wilds that might be able to cure the dog of the blight. Excuse me? I thought the blight wasn't curable, but a dog is able to be cured by a random flower from the nearby forest/swamp. Ignoring the absolutely bonkers contradiction of the lore here, let's just assume that the flower itself did nothing and the dog is just naturally resistant to the taint and managed to survive its effects, in a way becoming a Grey Warden dog without the magical part of the ritual or the archdemon blood. Even if you are a human noble, you can still find the flower in the wilds, and if you return it to the kennel master, you can ask for a reward. I believe he can give you 20 silver for it, which is honestly not bad for such an early part of the game when most characters barely have any money. Further up, and slightly across the Kennel Master, is a huge podium where there's a single Chantry sister preaching and or praying over a group of soldiers. Praying for the Maker's blessing, I suppose? Anyway, you can listen to her if you'd like, or you can steal from a few of the soldiers who are busy listening instead. The soldiers here don't really have much to steal, very few of them have anything at all, but if you have the skill, you might as well make use of it. The Kennel Master, Ash Warrior Leader, and Duncan are higher ranked targets that are far more likely to have something valuable to pilfer, but they're also harder to steal from, and your results may vary because what you get is randomly rolled from a table of items. Near a tree and the nearby Magi encampment where the mages are doing some weird icy dance choreography is Wynn, who is later going to be a recruitable companion during the Broken Circle main quest. She doesn't really say much of interest here, just wishes you good luck in the battle and tells you that the Darkspawn are connected to the Fade in a way because the original Tevinter Magisters got corrupted by the Blight there, yada yada. She does also mention that the mages aren't fighting in the front lines alongside the king, but provide support from a distance instead, which of course explains how the mages and Templars managed to survive and get back to the Circle Tower after the defeat at Ostagar. But frankly, you don't get to learn anything about Wynn herself other than the fact that she seems like a learned woman and a dutiful one. To be fair, in the game itself, there isn't much more to Wynn than the fact that she is a wise, dutiful woman, And don't forget old. Oh wow, she's so old, so she acts like an annoying grandmother to everyone. She's supposed to be in her late 40s, at most early 50s by the way, which is why I have a mod that makes her actually look the part. Sorry, I just really hate the fact that they let a 20-something-year-old person write Win in this way, and literally no one said, hey, maybe don't write a woman in her late 40s like that, thanks. But since Win didn't have much to offer us, let's move on before my rage about how she's written makes me ramble for another 10 minutes. Near her is a much more interesting character, a tranquil mage who is an enchanter. He can tell you about what tranquil mages are, the fact that the process of becoming tranquil strips them of both their magic and their emotions. He even tells you that the process involves their foreheads being branded with a magical symbol, which by the way was supposed to be a visual detail for the Tranquil in Dragon Age Origins, but the devs just weren't able to add it in. He also explains that the Tranquil are able to work with lyrium to enchant items and runes, even though regular mages wouldn't be able to due to their direct connection to magic. This guy is actually really cool and interesting to talk to, especially for a non-mage hero, because this will be your first real interaction with a mage, and specifically a tranquil mage who speaks mostly in monotone, as their emotions have been suppressed. The concept of the Rite of Tranquility is one of those cool bits of world building that is very striking, that reminds you of the fact that this is an original world, even if it's inspired by a bunch of things. So I love this NPC, even if he doesn't have any relevance to the plot, and the only quest he's related to is the Hungry Deserter, which just has to do with you using the key to unlock the mage's chest during the evening when the Tranquil isn't sitting next to it anymore. I wish they'd actually made this guy offer enchanting services, since it is possible for you to have a weapon that is tier 3, which can have runes added to it, and if you have someone who can unlock a chest for you, such as Davith temporarily, there's a chest in Ostagar which has 2 novice runes guaranteed. So I think it was a huge waste to not at least have a chance to add runes to a weapon during the prologue, especially since the Tranquil tells you about how cool enchanting is, but then you don't actually get to see how it is actually pretty nice to enchant your weapon. Across from the Tranquil, you can find Davith trying to seduce a fellow soldier and failing miserably, making the woman leave. You can introduce yourself, and he'll mention how him and Sir Jory were discussing who the third recruit would be. He generally says something about not expecting you to be whatever you are, or hoping for something else. He also was a bit paranoid about the joining ritual, thinking it was just something the wardens cooked up for you. He even eavesdropped on the wardens and correctly assumes that you are going to be sent into the wilds. Davith initially grew up in a small village near the Korcari Wilds, so he's heard about the chastened beasts and apparently cannibals that can be encountered in the wilds, and even explored them briefly a few times in his youth. It's interesting to get to hear a bit about the area from someone who actually grew up there. Such a shame Davith can't withstand the taint. I do wish both Sir Jory and Davith survived the joining, because they could have been interesting characters with ties to Redcliffe and Denram. I still like them, even if obviously you don't get that much from them in Ostagar because it's just the beginning, but also because they're not meant to survive, so the writers didn't put that much effort into writing them. The army quartermaster is in a little corner next to Davith, and I think he's also meant to be a bit of a smith, or at least able to make repairs, since he has a forge and other tools there. When you meet him, he can ask you if you've seen an elf running about because she's supposed to have fixed an armor. He doesn't speak very nicely about her, and though you can offer to track her down, he refuses your offer because you've probably got better things to do than look for a servant for him. I wish they'd kept this type of logic for all the utterly useless side quests in Origins, DA2, and Inquisition, thanks. Yes, the hero does indeed have much better things to do than complete dozens of little fetch quests. If you're an elf, he actually assumes you're one of his servants and asks why you're dressed so weirdly. Obviously, he profusely apologizes once he realizes you're a warden recruit, but the damage is done by that point. He's already shown himself to be incredibly racist. Anyway, his name is maybe Hardy. If you steal from him, you get the unique item Hardy's Belt, which grants +1 Constitution, so that's why I assume his name is Hardy. The quartermaster offers to sell the wardens some of what he has in stock. If you ask him what he sells, he'll also mention he has a special stock on the down low. There aren't really super many useful items here, most of them are basic weapons and armors. The health poultices and other consumables and ingredients are the best part of his stock. However, I will say that it's extremely weird he sells lyrium potions, and in his special stock he has a pair of mage boots and a magic staff as well. Who gave him those? The Templars? Why is he allowed to have those on hand at all, let alone sell them to random Grey Wardens? Up the ramp to the left is a little area with chantry tents, a priest blessing the soldiers, the infirmary, where a couple of injured soldiers are being treated by a nurse, and a prison area with a lone prisoner stuck in a cage. Sir Jory, the third warden recruit, is among the soldiers listening to the priest. He is a bit of a simple man, despite being a knight from Redcliffe. He doesn't seem to know much about anything, despite the fact that usually knights in Ferelden are fairly well educated. It's just possible the writers didn't think to give him something interesting or intelligent to say, since he was meant to die during the joining ritual anyway. Jory fought hard in a tournament in Highever to impress Duncan, and he also met his wife Helena there. He is originally from Redcliffe, but was allowed by Arleman to stay in Highever with his wife, though he does say that he's been trying to convince her to move back to Redcliffe with him. I honestly don't know which place is worse to live. Obviously, she might have gotten killed by the undead if she was in Redcliffe during the events of Origins, or later by the Darkspawn. But in Highever, there's also Arl Howe's coup, during which a lot of soldiers as well as regular people were killed. It's true that Howe's men focused on attacking the castle, not the town, but who's to say they didn't kill Sir Jory's wife too? Especially since she's the wife of a knight, she might have been living somewhere in the castle. In any case, Sir Jory is fairly ignorant of anything to do with elves and dwarves. He assumes that dwarves are smiths, because that's been his only real experience with them. He's also surprised that your hero joined the Grey Wardens, whether you are a dwarf, elf, or mage, assuming that people of this kind wouldn't be allowed to join the Wardens, because they aren't allowed to join the Ferelden army. He apologizes for any offense, and his comments come out of genuine ignorance, not ill intent, so I'll give Jory a pass since he seems like he's doing his best. He's just limited. Here, you can also interact with the Chantry Priest and either accept her blessing or refuse it, and she will have some choice words to say to an elf or dwarf if you dare refuse the Maker's blessings and say you don't care about her god. Honestly, this would be a perfect moment for the Warden's infamous cutscene murder knife to make an appearance, because this lady is a right twat. Moving on, just slightly off to the side from her is a prisoner in a cage who is being watched over by a bored guard. The prisoner was put there because the soldiers caught him sneaking around the camp in the middle of the night and assumed he was deserting. He says he hasn't been given a sentence yet, and that no one has given him food or water since he was imprisoned either. He asks if you can get the guard's portion for him, and if you ask for something in return, or are at least curious enough to ask what he was actually doing at night, you'll find out he stole a key from a mage and was planning on looting the locked chest that you can find next to the Tranquil, since he assumed it would be full of magic treasures. He can give you the key in exchange for the food and water, and you have a few ways of solving this quest, which is nice. Option number 1 is to just kill the prisoner and take the key. If you want to obtain the food and water, you can steal it from the guard, or you can speak to the guard and either persuade him to give it to you if you have the coercion skill, or else pay him 10 silver for it, which is extremely expensive for just one meal. You can of course also just ignore the prisoner if your hero has better things to do. As a bonus, during the Return to Ostagar DLC, if you didn't open the mage's chest, you can open it during the DLC and find a unique Corrupted Magister's staff in there. If you opened it during the prologue, you won't be able to do so anymore unless you have a mod like Quinn's Fix Pack or Dane's Fixes or something of the sort, which allows you to get the staff in various situations. This is a nice little side quest that can get you a little extra loot that you can either use or sell, plus you get to roleplay your warden since you're given multiple ways to solve the quest. Obviously, this doesn't have any real consequences, but it does work well to get the player used to the fact that they do in fact have different choices that either lead to different outcomes or at least feel different for the purpose of roleplaying. Finally, there's the infirmary. There's a man who saw Darkspawn while scouting in the Korcari Wilds, and he is utterly terrified of them. He keeps saying that they're coming and they'll overwhelm everyone and all that. The nurse apologizes on his behalf for his panicked ramblings and explains that even though he's speaking like this, he doesn't actually have the Darkspawn taint. He's just been traumatized, essentially. There's another soldier laid on a cot nearby who does seem to be infected with the Darkspawn taint because his voice line is about how it burns. So unless he has a regular injury that hurts like hell, I can't really figure out why he sat there next to other people who aren't tainted instead of being mercy killed. Going back to the main area and then ascending the other slope, there's not much of interest in the super large area here. The table on the left where the servants are will be used later for the war meeting, but otherwise there's just one chest and nothing of interest. Up to the right, you can meet Alistair, who is arguing with a mage about some demands of the Grand Cleric, with the mage storming off and Alistair making a bad joke about naming a grumpy child after that mage, and another bad joke about how one good thing about the Blight is that it brings people together. You have a little conversation with him about how he was coerced into talking with a mage on behalf of the Chantry, even though he was a Grey Warden, and shouldn't need to do any of that, because he used to be a Templar, and he also complains that mages hate him, and worries that you might be a mage as well. Anyway, now that you've found Alistair, you can get back to Duncan, and in fact, talking to Daveth and Sir Jory is entirely optional, though it does grant you some additional XP. In the area where you find Alistair is also a locked chest that contains 2 novice runes, Flame and Slow, together with a random item. Going back to Duncan, he'll explain that for the joining ritual, you will need 3 vials of Darkspawn blood, which you will need to obtain yourselves by fighting the Darkspawn in the Korcari Wilds. Apparently, this is a tradition, although I'm unsure where exactly Warden recruits would be able to fight Darkspawn if they get recruited when there isn't an active blight. Are they just taken to the deep roads to follow this tradition? That doesn't sound like a great idea. Anyway, in addition to your joining-related task, Duncan also tells you to search for an overgrown ruin that was once a Grey Warden outpost, where you're supposed to find some ancient scrolls that are treaties which promise the support of various factions against the Blight. Duncan says that Alistair will help you find this ruin, but Alistair never makes any comment anywhere in the Korcari Wilds about, oh yeah, the ruin should be in the north, or anything. So you're completely on your own to explore the entire area until you find it, or it'll be marked on your map if you have quest markers on. Now we're finally getting to the end of Ostagar Camp Part 1, or Daytime, and reaching the Korcari Wilds section. As a little conclusion to the Daytime Ostagar Camp, I'll say that it has a lot of interesting information you can find out, but pretty much all of it is entirely optional. You never have to speak to the King's Guard or Loghain's Guard. It's not guaranteed you can speak to Loghain unless you have the coercion skill. You don't even have to talk to Daveth or Jory or ask them about where they come from. Daveth, for example, was a pickpocket in Denram, and he tried to steal from Duncan, ran away and was caught by the guards and was going to be executed because he was a wanted man. But Duncan intervened and conscripted him into the Wardens because Duncan himself used to be a pickpocket and killed a Warden and was then conscripted by the man's lover, who just so happened to be the Warden commander. You wouldn't know that unless you're curious to try and talk to Daveth again when he's added to your party. You don't have to talk to the Ash Warriors, even though they're an interesting little group. You don't have to talk to the Tranquil Mage or with Wynn. Yeah, it's an area filled with so much world building, but the average player will at most interact with a quarter of it. Duncan could have tasked you with getting something from the mages for the joining ritual, and you'd have to talk to the Tranquil for that. And due to the weird way he speaks, a player might be curious to ask a few more questions. Similarly, you could be told that you can get some information about the wilds from the Ash Warriors who have scouted it before, and so on and so forth. Plenty of opportunities to actually get the player to talk to these NPCs, because otherwise Ostagar can feel like a fairly empty place, devoid of content. To be fair, it is fairly empty compared to something like Lothering or Redcliffe. You only get 2 actual side quests, the prisoner with a mage chest key and curing the dog in the kennels. And there's also the unmarked side quest with the Elven Messenger and Sir Garland's sword, but that one is only for more selfish wardens who don't care that they're depriving a knight of his weapon. You can tell that the actual exploration part of Ostagar and the side quests were an afterthought. The introduction, when you meet the king, is cool. The joining ritual at night is a wake-up call that tells you that shit got real and this isn't your average heroic fantasy. And the cutscenes from the Battle of Ostagar itself are really epic. But otherwise, unless you specifically immerse yourself by interacting with all of these NPCs on purpose, Ostagar's war camp can feel like a very forgettable experience, which is a shame because it has all the elements it needs to be compelling, but the devs either didn't have the time or they didn't think it was important to connect these elements in a way that actually made the player more likely to soak them in. Moving on to the Korcari Wilds. This is mostly a combat gauntlet meant to get the player used to controlling 4 party members before the even more challenging Tower of Ashal. Other than the Dwarf Noble, you have at most had 3 total party members, so it makes sense the Wilds are meant to still be somewhat of a tutorial area for full party combat. It doesn't mean it's easy, not at all. I remember I definitely died to the very first pack of wolves when I first played the game, but that was also because I was extremely bad at it. I was 13 and I had no idea how stats in RPGs worked. Plus there were a lot of technical words in the game that I didn't understand. Anyway, many of the combat encounters in here are no joke. You get attacked by a large pack of wolves right at the edge of the wilds. Unless you target 1 or 2 at a time and thin out the pack, you might get overwhelmed because wolves do a significant amount of damage, especially to fairly low armor characters. A bit further on, there's a dying soldier who you can either talk to, which starts a conversation in which Alistair says you have to bandage him up or heal him, and the only way you can say no to that is by actually killing the guy yourself and then casually telling Alistair, as I said, we don't have time. It's brutal, it employs the wonderful little cutscene murder knife of the warden, and it's honestly kind of crazy that that's an option. Otherwise, you can also ignore the soldier, and if you walk past him, he will make a dying noise, die, and then you'll be able to loot something from him like a pair of boots. He'll also have this loot if you kill him yourself with the murder knife. If you took the time to talk to him, he'll say that he was scouting in the wilds with a group of soldiers, and they were all killed by the Darkspawn. He was the only survivor. As a human noble, you can worry that this group of soldiers was the one your older brother Fergus was a part of, and you'd be right, except Fergus miraculously survives because he's found by a group of chastened and nursed back to health. This poor soldier probably ends up dying anyway, since the Battle of Ostagar is lost and anyone who didn't retreat with Logain ends up overwhelmed and killed by the Darkspawn. So maybe it is a mercy to kill him in the wilds, so that he doesn't suffer a worse fate later. Sir Jory starts getting agitated here, wondering how the hell 4 people are supposed to be able to kill the Darkspawn here if a much larger group of soldiers were wiped out. And his freakout is 100% justified, by the way. If it weren't for the fact that you're the main character, it actually doesn't make any sense for you to be able to survive the Korcari Wilds if a much larger retinue of soldiers who are warriors and rogues of a similar level to you get killed. The only thing that would make sense is that they managed to kill a good amount of Darkspawn, or that most of the Darkspawn who killed them left the wild to rejoin the horde in the valley, meaning that you're only fighting a few stragglers. Both Alistair and Davith kind of call Jory a coward, Davith straight up, while Alistair just reassures him that Grey Wardens can sense Darkspawn. Plus, this is part of their task, so they'll be just fine. It's not really much of a reassurance. Davith himself notes that, hey, at least if you're gonna die, you'll be told ahead of time. No. Sir Jory isn't a coward. He's a logical man who assumed he was just joining a more elite group of fighters that was similar to the army, but just army plus, you know? He didn't want anything to do with weird rituals and extra tests that unnecessarily put you in danger right before a major battle is supposed to take place, even though you could get injured enough that you'll be unable to fight when it actually matters. Anyway, in terms of non-combat, there are a couple of side quests you can pick up here. One is related to 2 Chantry missionaries, a father and a son, who had come down in the south to try to spread the belief in the Maker among the chastened people. The father came here first, and was then followed by his son. You can find a cache of items that the father Rigby left for his son Jogby. Who came up with these names? Anyway, to get to the chest, you have to fight a group of wolves, which includes a dangerous wolf Alpha. A really cool encounter is the one where you find the corpse of missionary Rigby up to the left on a hill. There's actually Darkspawn and wolves fighting each other. The first time I saw this, I actually just stopped in my tracks and watched them kill each other, then killed the winners. It was very fun, very much recommend it. You can also get from Rigby's body his last will and testament, which mentions that there is a little box of valuables that he stashed in his camp on the east side of the wilds. And should anyone find this, they're supposed to take it to his wife Jeddah, who can be found in Redcliffe. The combat encounter against the Darkspawn at this campsite is tough. Even knowing exactly what it has in store for me, if I'm not paying enough attention and approach it a bit too confidently, I get my ass handed to me. There's just such a large number of enemies, especially archers, and at a low level, it's really dangerous to be attacked by multiple enemies at the same time because you don't really have a lot of health or armor or defense. At the campsite, you can pick up the box meant for Jeddah, and you can either open it to keep the contents for yourself, or leave it closed with the intention of bringing it to Rigby's wife. Unfortunately, in the base game, if you bring the lockbox to Jeddah, she just thanks you for it, but you don't receive any reward. No money or item from her, and no XP for completing the quest. So opening the lockbox is the most useful thing to do unless you're bringing it back as a role-playing choice, because it'll reward you with 2 health poultices, an emerald, a malachite, a note, and the beloved amulet, which is a plot item that doesn't have any use. If you have Quinn's Fixpack installed, this mod fixes this quest by implementing an actual XP reward for bringing back the lockbox, as well as slightly changing the contents of the lockbox. Like for example, the amulet is no longer a plot item and can be sold for a bit of money, and the lockbox itself actually has more money inside it if you open it. It's one of those situations where it is absolutely more profitable to make the selfish choice still, even with the mod adding the XP reward, but then again, that fits the theme of rewarding greed or the abuse of power, because that is indeed how the powerful get to their positions to begin with, unless they were born into them, and that's certainly how they hold on to their power. Still haven't made that video about all the greedy choices in the AO and how the player is constantly tempted to pick them, but I promise I will one day because it's very much a topic that's interesting to explore, just like analyzing these areas is a ton of fun. For me at least. I hope you're enjoying the journey too. Anyway, you can also find Rigby's notes about the Chastened and some of the signs they've left around the wilds that should theoretically lead to a cache of items. And indeed, if you click on a bunch of random bushes that do not in any way, shape, or form have any Chastened symbols or carvings on them, you will be pointed to a hollow log further north in the wilds that has a bunch of Chastened and Barbarian items in it. But the unfortunate thing is that you can loot that cache even if you don't follow the Chastened Trail Sign side quest, so that's disappointing. In general, it's disappointing that a few items and some mentions are all we really get of the Chastened in the entire game. Well, I guess there's the handful of Chastened NPCs in Lothering as well, but they're unfortunately wearing just basic leather armor, so they don't really stand out as any different from the regular bandits and other combat-able people you see in Ferelden. Back to following the main quest to find the ancient treaties, there's a weird little passing encounter where you see a few men strung up above you, and I suppose they were supposed to be strung up by the Darkspawn, though I can't imagine why the Darkspawn would take the time to hang people. Have these men been hung by someone else, like the Chastened or the cannibals that Davith mentioned? I genuinely never understood why they were there, because there's nothing explaining who these men were, why they were punished by hanging, and who did that to them. So yeah, if you have any idea what this is supposed to be about, do let me know in the comments, because it's one of Dragon Age's biggest unsolved mysteries for me. After the Alpha Wolf encounter, or after avoiding it if you don't feel like fighting enemies off the main path, you get to this large area with a few ruined arches that I suppose is meant to suggest you're getting closer to the ruins you're seeking, though that never registered in my brain. I just kind of saw those in a big empty space and thought, uh-oh, something big is up ahead. And indeed, something big is up ahead. Not big as in large in size, but big as in dangerous. Possibly your first encounter against a Darkspawn emissary who will absolutely fireball your ass if you aren't careful. Look, I like casting fireballs in D&D too, but it kind of gets annoying in Dragon Age is all I'll say. I prefer the more interesting and weird spells that DAO has over the super basic ones based on D&D. Like really the entire entropy tree, stuff like Stinging Swarm, some of the spirit spells, and so on. And give Darkspawn some unique blight magic too. They should 100% cast weird and dangerous spells that regular mages don't have access to instead of spamming Fireball. Anyway, moving on from my little rant about spells, this emissary fight is tough. And I get my party wiped very frequently here, especially when I'm doing a challenge run and have extremely limited gear or abilities. There aren't that many enemies aside from the emissary, just a few Hurlocks and Genlocks, and you may also get ambushed by a few stealthed Darkspawn who are waiting for you near the bridge leading to the emissary. An interesting design choice is that there's some big bear traps set up, which will either ensure whoever stepped in it is going to be dead before they wrench their foot out of it, or else that they will be extremely injured and need to use a health poultice immediately. Either way, this encounter is very well designed with multiple sources of danger. The emissary is the highest priority by far due to having high damage spells that will wreck low-level characters, then the traps should be avoided at all costs, and finally you're also getting pelted by arrows from the ranged Hurlocks and Genlocks who keep shooting you until you get in melee range with them. Definitely a challenging and memorable fight. Once you've managed to conquer that encounter, there's a couple more interesting things you can do before moving on to the final battle up on the hill near the ruins of the Warden Outpost. Down to a side, there's a campfire where you can find the Chastened cache, whether or not you got it marked on your map by following the Chastened trail signs. It has a Barbarian mace, a Chastened crusher maul, Chastened robes, a Thane helmet, a Wilds bow, and 3 random minerals. They're all okay for the early game, though the bow is kind of useless whenever you get it. But hey, free stuff that you can sell if it's not useful for you to use. If you go slightly up the hill to the left of where you fought the emissary, there's a soldier corpse with a pouch of ashes, as well as a codex entry explaining some local legend about the spirit Gazarath, who could be summoned to grant a wish to whoever summoned him. If you go to the stone pile higher on the hill and scatter the ashes, of course, you are not getting any wishes granted unless your wish was to fight the first boss rank enemy in the game, the Shade Gazarath. He is very powerful and can easily wipe out your entire team with his Flame Blast spell, because you don't really have fire resistance at this point in the game, or have very small amounts, and any armor or defense you have is useless. So be careful, use health poultices when your character's HP gets too low, but if you succeed, you'll be rewarded with a hefty amount of XP for killing a boss, as well as obtain the mage-restricted light boots Enchanter's Footing, which are decent defensive boots for mages. You may also get a medium chest piece, either chainmail or scale armor, but those aren't guaranteed. The main reason you'd want to fight Gazarath is for the XP and the bragging rights, and of course for role-playing reasons if you think that your hero is the superstitious sort to believe in spirits that grant wishes, even though you literally find these ashes in the story about Gazarath on a dead man. It is a very cool fight though. Anyway, just one more fight to top it all off on the top of the hill at the entrance of the ruined outpost. This one is against an elite rank Hurlock Alpha that's fairly strong, especially because it's being supported by a bunch of archer/melee Darkspawn. Just like with the other significant encounters in this area, due to their decently large numbers, the Darkspawn can overwhelm you if you aren't careful. Once you've finally killed all the beasts and Darkspawn in your way, you can enter the old Warden Outpost, only to find that the magically sealed chest that was supposed to hold the treaties is broken and empty. You're approached by a strange woman who questions your intention in her wilds. She introduces herself as Morrigan, and if you ask what happened to the treaties, she's very happy to tell you that her mother is the one who took them, and she offers to bring you to her mother. Alistair and Davith both believe that she's a spooky witch of the wilds and are extremely distrustful of her. I personally was relieved to find an actual alive human being who didn't immediately attack me, after having to fight wolves and darkspawn the entire way, but, to each their own. You get to meet Flemeth, who unfortunately looks like an unwashed crazy old woman, though I honestly think it fits the kind of low profile she's trying to keep in Origins, despite the fact that I know she was always supposed to have the cool dragon horn design that they made for her in DA2. I think she could have looked slightly less unwashed and maybe had some unique witchy robes on her, but otherwise I really like her unassuming looks. Flemeth has some cryptic advice for you and the Grey Wardens, which of course no one can understand until after the disaster at Ostagar, but she gives you the treaties without any fuss, explaining that the magic ward protecting them wore off a long time ago, and she simply took them to keep them safe until the Grey Wardens return. Such a nice lady, Flemeth. I've always liked her. She reacts in different ways based on your race, and based on which dialogue options you choose as well, which is a fun little detail because it definitely makes your first conversation with her just that little bit more memorable because she feels extremely reactive to who you are and how you choose to treat her. I also just love the character of Flemeth. She's my favorite NPC, and honestly, second favorite character, ironically second best to her own daughter, Morrigan. I love how she's trying to help people, but she's decided that she doesn't want to directly involve herself in things anymore, so she finds heroes to do that instead, and nudges them just the slightest bit until they're on the right path, then lets them do their own thing. I like how she's clearly wise and knowledgeable way beyond the years that a regular human woman would be able to live for, so it's not really a surprise when you find out later that she is the Flemeth of old legend, that she once made a deal with spirits of some sort and or potentially a demon, so she's technically an abomination, and that she has the magical ways to extend her lifespan. Of course, later on in Inquisition, we find out that the spirit or demon in question that she's been housing is none other than the spirit of Mythal, but that's not relevant for the analysis of the Korcari Wilds and Dragon Age Origins. Your introduction to Morrigan and Flemeth is simply memorable and intriguing, especially on your first playthrough when you don't really know what's coming. Flemeth will instruct Morrigan to lead your group out of the wilds, and then you're back in Ostagar, only now it's evening. There isn't actually that much you can do in the camp, unfortunately. Obviously, it makes logical sense because you're supposed to quickly go through the joining ritual before the Battle of Ostagar begins, so you're kind of in a rush. But from a player perspective, it's a bit frustrating because this is one of the only times you actually get to see the same area at a different time of day, which is very cool and only really happens 3 more times in the entire game. Once during the undead attack in Redcliffe, which is an extremely short sequence, once when Redcliffe is attacked by Darkspawn before the final battle, which is also a short sequence, and the final battle itself when you get to fight through the ruined districts of the city of Denrim. Technically speaking, the Circle Tower and the Alienage kind of fall under this as well, seeing as they're in a very different state when you return to them, but that's only if you are a Circle Mage or City Elf respectively. Otherwise, you wouldn't have seen them in their more or less regular form in your playthrough. One thing I loved about Dragon Age 2 was the ability to go to different areas of Kirkwall during daytime and nighttime and actually have that affect which quests were available, which NPCs were there, and so on. So I do think the devs figured out that this was one of the cool things that they did a little bit of in Origins that appealed to players, though of course it could also just be something they did because of the extreme time pressure, because they weren't able to make more areas, so having the same area during the day and night added at least a bit of variety to the quests and combat. Anyway, back to the Ostagar camp in the evening. You can go give the flower to the Kennel Master if you found it and received your reward, or just do it as a good deed without accepting money. You can sell off whatever loot you don't want to the Quartermaster and buy something that you may not have been able to afford from him beforehand. It's a bit of a weird thing, but his stock replenishes in the evening because these are technically 2 different areas. That's a bit annoying for immersion purposes because how does the guy just have a bunch of stuff that you just bought earlier when it's only been a few hours? It would have been fine if your expedition to find the treaties and Darkspawn blood took a few days, but as it stands, it's just weird. You can also finally loot the Mage's Chest if you've got the key from the prisoner. If you have the stealing skill, the NPCs you can steal from have also reset, so you can steal from them again, though there's not many, but hey, free money is free money. Otherwise, if you speak to Duncan, you can turn in the Darkspawn blood for the joining, as well as say you found the treaties, though he lets you hold on to them since he likely knows Kaelin is planning on sending you and Alistair away from the battle in case things go wrong. Obviously, Duncan doesn't tell you that, but that's what we can infer from his choices. If you're ready for the joining, the hero, Davith, and Jory are taken up to the area where you first met Alistair. You find out why there are so few wardens and why the joining ritual is so secretive. The joining ritual can be fatal, only some survive it. Sir Jory freaks out about it, and honestly, the oppressive atmosphere before the Battle of Ostagar isn't helping, and the fact that you're doing this in the middle of the night and Alistair and Duncan are both looking at you with pity isn't helping either. So Sir Jory, who was supposed to be this righteous knight who left his pregnant wife to join the Wardens and fight off the Darkspawn, and who has valiantly fought the Darkspawn thus far in the wilds, suddenly decides that drinking Darkspawn blood is too much and he doesn't want to die, so he tries to back away and fight Duncan off to escape. Duncan easily overpowers and kills him, and it's just very shocking for the sake of shock value. It's not really that much different for Sir Jorah to have been killed by a wolf or by the Darkspawn while we were gallivanting in the wilds searching for the ancient treaties, and clearly he was fine with dying there, even if understandably apprehensive about how smart of a decision it was to put yourself in that much danger for some old documents and a bit of blood. So why he suddenly turns into a coward is beyond me. It never made any sense. I understand that the writers wanted to show that the Grey Wardens are morally grey and will do whatever is necessary to end the Blight, but then write a better character who actually makes sense to be a coward. Hell, if anything, Daveth would have been the one to decide, nah, actually I think I'd have preferred being hung in Denerim than being forced to drink Darkspawn blood. So if you have to choose one of these two to run away, Daveth would make far more sense. Daveth drinks first and unfortunately dies, as his body and or mind is unable to bear the Darkspawn taint. Sir Jorah is killed by Duncan, and then you're told to drink from the goblet with magically infused Darkspawn blood. That's the secret behind the Grey Warden's ability to kill Darkspawn and end blights. They purposefully taint themselves with Darkspawn blood in order to sense them and the Archdemon through a blood connection. Of course, there's the matter of only Grey Wardens being able to kill an Archdemon, but you don't find out that completely insignificant detail until the very end of the game. Your hero drinks next and you pass out, having a brief vision of a gnarly-looking dragon, the Archdemon, after which you wake up to a very awkward vision of Duncan and Alistair far too close to your face checking to see if you're alive. You're given a little amulet that has some of the blood used in the joining ritual as a morbid memento to remind you of the ones who didn't survive, and then are told that after you recover, you should join Duncan at the war meeting in that large area of the ruin that had been suspiciously empty during the day. At this point, you can still trade with the quartermaster, so do so if you haven't. You may have some extra loot from Daveth and Jorah, since their equipment gets thrown into your inventory after they die if you didn't already take it beforehand. As you arrive, King Cailan and Loghain are arguing about the fact that Cailan wants to fight alongside the Wardens in the valley, and Loghain tells him he's risking too much by playing hero on the front lines. So based on this thing that Loghain says, I genuinely believe that he was only trying to kill off the Wardens, not Cailan himself, since he seems to have constantly tried to convince Cailan to not be part of the main battle. Cailan takes Loghain's comment completely the wrong way, taking it to mean that they don't have enough soldiers, and he thinks then that it would be better for them to wait for the Orlesian reinforcements to arrive. This of course aggravates Loghain, who hates the Orlesians, and who thinks it's a foolish decision to depend on Orlais to defend for Eldon. You're briefly noticed together with Duncan and congratulated by the king for becoming a warden. Loghain is very bitter about Cailan's fascination with the Grey Wardens, and honestly he's kind of right because the Wardens haven't exactly been good people, historically speaking. The king and Loghain talk strategy about the fight then. Cailan's forces are to goad the Darkspawn into attacking them in the valley, and then they're supposed to signal someone in the Tower of Ishal to light the beacon, which will be the sign Loghain is waiting for to charge in with his soldiers and pincer the Darkspawn. When Cailan asks who is supposed to do this, Loghain easily replies he has a few men stationed there, and that it's not a dangerous task, but it is vital. For some reason, Cailan suddenly decides to say at this moment that Alistair and the new Grey Warden should be sent to the tower to light the signal. This is the most strange and the only seemingly out-of-character thing that Cailan says the whole time you interact with him in the game, and I can only imagine that he really wasn't as confident in the outcome of his battle as he seemed, so he was waiting for a chance to somehow get Alistair, his half-brother, away from danger. He probably thinks that a super fresh Warden recruit isn't going to be that good in a fight either, and will likely die quickly, so that's why I think he volunteers your hero to be sent along with Alistair to the tower. Not that Cailan would care personally about you, but as a new recruit you wouldn't be that much help anyway, so might as well have a little bodyguard following his half-brother just in case, right? Loghain thinks that Cailan relies on the Grey Wardens too much, and Cailan seems fed up with Loghain's conspiracy theories. So I'm actually going to assume Loghain tried to tell Cailan about the whole thing with the Architect trying to bring the blight to everything, and some of the Wardens being convinced to follow his plan. And then Cailan just thinks he's crazy, I guess, and that is just a conspiracy theory. We also briefly see Uldred, one of the senior enchanters of the Circle, suggesting that the tower and its beacon are unnecessary because the Circle mages could simply provide a signal themselves. He's interrupted by the Grand Cleric, who won't trust any lives to their spells, so she tells him to save them for the Darkspawn. Rude little bitch, isn't she? She interrupts Uldred too. Can't blame the poor guy for falling prey to a demon if this is the kind of shit he's had to deal with while he's actively trying to help the king's army. After this conversation, we find ourselves back at Duncan's bonfire, where he explains to Alistair and the hero that they need to go to the Tower of Ishal and wait for the signal to light the beacon. Of course, things don't nearly go as smoothly as expected, as the Tower of Ishal has been overwhelmed by Darkspawn and all of Logain's men who were inside are dead. But if you want an analysis of the Tower of Ishal, I made a separate video about that. The fitting end for this particular analysis is watching the cool cinematic that starts off the Battle of Ostagar. No words, let's just enjoy this together. But do stick around for a little conclusion afterwards.
The plan will work, Your Majesty.
Of course it will. The Blight ends here.
This was Ostagar, an ancient Tevinter fortress that has seen countless battles between the Tevinter and the Chastened, between the Chastened and other tribes, between the Ferelden's and the Chastened, and now between the Ferelden's and the Darkspawn. It's such an epic location, and it's a shame that you don't get to be part of a big fight in the valley, or that you don't get to explore it more, or that it isn't filled with more interesting and engaging content. There's quite a bit of lore to discover if you're a curious player and talk to everyone, but even if you do, there's only so much that a simple conversation with an NPC does. The best way to introduce the player to the world and make them care is always through a story, through conflict, through the struggles of a character. That's why the most memorable parts of Ostagar have always been the big character moments. Meeting King Kalen, meeting your fellow recruits and Alistair, such as he is, talking to a prisoner who is either about to get hanged or else he's going to starve in a cage because no one will think to free him when they run from the Darkspawn, meeting Morrigan and Flemeth in the Wilds, and of course the joining ritual, the tense war meeting, and the cool cutscenes of the battle, both when it starts, as well as when Kalen and Duncan are overwhelmed and killed by the Darkspawn after Logain chooses to retreat. Overall, I think the areas of Ostagar and the Korcari Wilds are designed in a fairly clumsy way by people who didn't quite know what they were supposed to do with them. Obviously, it doesn't much matter what you do during this prologue because nearly everyone dies, and the ones who don't are mostly the ones who wouldn't care about what you did or didn't do because they've taken Logain's side anyway. You also don't want the prologue to be too long because the real main story is about how the Warden unites Ferelden's various factions to defeat the Blight, So if you spend too long on what is supposed to act as the inciting incident for this main plot, it might be too frustrating or slow-paced. But in my opinion, if it had been well done, a slightly longer questline for Ostagar could have been implemented with success. Maybe the Warden would have gotten to take part in a small skirmish alongside King Kaelin, and gotten to know the king a little better, maybe get a little bit attached. You'd get to speak to Duncan a little more too, and Loghain, and just generally have a bit more time to create some emotional investment towards these characters so that their deaths hit harder. Plus, it's always cool to be part of a large-scale fight, like the one in Redcliffe against the undead and of course the Battle of Denrim, so this would have been an epic skirmish that would have made the player look forward to the next time they'd get to fight the Darkspawn in this way. I have, as you can probably tell, hundreds if not thousands of ideas of how I'd improve Dragon Age Origins if I could remake it, so we'd be here all day if I talked about all of them. But what I'm trying to say here in this conclusion is that yes, I can completely understand why some players may find Ostagar and the Korcari Wilds boring. The lack of importance of any choices you make here particularly makes the whole prologue feel useless, and of course the lack of time to get emotionally invested, plus the general lack of quests, adds to the feeling of emptiness. So this makes players rush through it, or even sometimes install mods that skip this area. I actually did that for a while some years ago, until I rediscovered my love of experiencing Ostagar as I started doing challenge playthroughs. One of the worst things you can do while you're in Ostagar is use DLC items, because they will make the game much too easy, and what was already light on content will feel even more so due to how quickly you go through each combat encounter. And mind you, most of these combat encounters are designed to actually be challenging for low-level players. So yeah, it's a really bad time if one of the only things that was well designed is undermined by the fact that the player is much more powerful than they should be. I know the DLC items look fun and shiny, but just don't use them until at least a little later, okay? Or better yet, sell them or destroy them. The game is so much more fun and engaging and challenging if you're not already overpowered at level 4. Anyway, this has been my extremely long, sometimes rambly and ranty analysis of Ostagar and the Korcari Wilds in Dragon Age Origins. I hope you found this interesting, and I hope you'll let me know what your own experience with these areas was like, especially on your first playthrough, though of course your current thoughts on them are also welcome since you may have noticed certain details I completely missed or forgot to talk about in this video. If you enjoyed this, stick around for future videos I plan to make about Dragon Age and other games I care about. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or maybe become a channel member. This is a small channel, and every video I make is something that I personally want to make, not to please trends or the algorithm, so genuinely anything helps. This has been B-Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.